Well, hello there. Happy for you to join us. I am Brian M. Truskowski with Illuminate, and I want to welcome you to the second season of my podcast, Illuminated Conversations. And to start off this podcast, I am so excited to have on the first show Jocelyn Bellows. She has an amazing book that just came out called Breakdown to Wake Up. And the reason I'm excited to have her on as the first guest is the second season is going to have a different flair, as the first season had a flair around just checking in, gives you an experience, and what was happening in the pandemic is really a unique time. And also for me, sort of trying it out, doing interviews, doing podcasts for the first time was really new for me. I learned a lot and I know how to move forward. So with that, why I'm excited to have Jocelyn on the show is this. The topics that we're going to be covering this time around are really around transformation, as really the core of what I work with are people in transition and transformation. Transformation is a powerful thing, right? And so for me, the question, the query really is going to be the nugget of what I talk about in this particular season of my podcast are going to be having my guests talk about a transformational experience that they've had. And when they were having that transformational experience, it felt like their world was ending. It felt like it was coming to all the walls are collapsing, the world was ending, and they were metaphorically dying. And they couldn't possibly see what was on the other end. However, once they went through that experience, realizing that that transformation or loss was an amazing gift, and it brought in a new way of being that they couldn't have seen from the other side of that wall, something they couldn't have authored before, something couldn't even imagine before. And I have so many of those experiences myself where transitions, I kind of joke, are my middle name, right? Where I've just seen so much, experienced so much, transitioned so much. um, I mean, I can give you one short nugget that I've shared with people and other podcasts that I've been on, where one, and this is really small, really truncated version of it, is when I was in my late 20s, I was working for a plumbing firm doing new construction remodeling in San Francisco. And I wasn't happy. I was depressed. I was in a relationship. I wasn't happy. And I was looking for more, right? I was looking for more, looking for more, looking for more. And what I realized was, I was fighting it. I was pushing the river. I was trying to control this thing to go the way that I wanted to. And it almost killed me, literally. I had two major um, injuries within the course of 2 months that could have been really tragic. And it was really like I felt like my guy's shooting a cannonball across the bow of my life, saying, you know what, you better do something because it's going to get worse. And over the course of the next few years, I redirected my life, got out of the industry of construction and got into massage and body work. And then, a few short years later, my spiritual awakening happened, and that just branched into where my life is going now, right? So from the other side of that wall, all I saw was working for other people. All I saw was working in construction, following the route that I had been laid before, get a job in the trades, it'll pay you well, and then you can get married, which, I was on track to do that, and then life is good. And, Midwest boy living in California, game over, right? But I was depressed and it nearly killed me. And I'm glad it did. I'm glad I had all those experiences because they helped inform and shift and shape my world to what it was going to become. Being a healer, being a body worker practitioner, and helping people through those tragic times, becoming a coach, helping people through tragic times and giving them empowerment to help them see the other side and help usher them to the other side, right? So that's why I'm so excited about being a transformational coach and having this conversation, because I feel like there are so many people who have had this conversation. And I want to be another channel for which people can share their experiences so that you, my listeners and guests, can be inspired, uplifted, motivated, and encouraged to take that leap of faith into the new way of being. Because the clients that I work with, a lot of time, they just say, like, I'm done. I can't operate in the way that I've been operating anymore, and something has got to give. And that's where I come in. I help them see possibility of what is possible, what's next, and with that, where they can go and help them, give them confidence to get there, right? And that's what I really love doing. So with that, I am excited to bring on my first guest, Jocelyn Bellows. Like I said, She's an amazing woman. I know you're going to love this conversation. I know I'm going to enjoy this conversation. So stay tuned and we will get going with the conversation. All right. Hey, Jocelyn. I am so excited to have you on the show today. I know that you just wrote your new book, Breakdown to Wake Up, and it's just starting to get going. So give the audience a little about what's going on with that book and a little bit about the stories. I know this is really exciting and really alive for you right now.
Yeah, I'll jump right in a minute. First, I want to say thank you, Brian, for having me on the show. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this next half hour or so with you and with your audience. And to jump right in, Breakdown to Wake Up, Journey Beyond the Now came out in November, late November. And it's actually a culmination of myself and 15 other authors spanning 5 continents. And the whole concept of the book is is that we all came together and shared personal journeys of breakdowns that we've had in our lives. Those times when we're in the valley of our life and we're not really sure who we are, what we're up to, what we're doing in our life, and how our life got so directionless. And for each one of us, each one of the authors, each one of those stories, not only were they very personal, they were all very unique. For myself, I spoke about the ending of my marriage and who I was who I started to become as a result of my marriage ending. I had other authors come on board. One who talked about menopause. She had taken a pregnancy test, thought she was pregnant, and found out she was starting menopause. And that was literally unfolding. Yeah, that was literally unfolding days before we went into the first round draft of the book. She had reached out to me and said, I was going to write something else. And I found this. I just discovered this. And this is what I want to write about. And she left me a message in tears. And this woman's really peppy. And I was like, wow. I was like, yes, this is the story you do need to share. And I coached her through the process of her writing process, because it was literally unfolding for her in the days and weeks as we were coming together as a publication. So that was just one story. I have another man came on board, and he left a cult and came out, and wrote a letter to his mom about his experience and how he loved her and how he felt. For so long they had a strained relationship. He said, I still love you. And I didn't recognize all the pain you must be still in, because you're living in this caged world, and I'm set free. So many beautiful stories just along those lines. And really, I want to share a little bit of backstory of even how the book came to be. It started, yes, it is actually a culmination of my own personal journey. Back in the late summer of 2020, early fall 2020, I connected with a woman with the intent of swapping podcast recordings, guestings. And I knew very quickly that there was something about this individual that just struck me. I got a download. And I asked her, we ended up never even talking about our podcast. Still to this day, we have not talked about our podcast. What resulted was me asking her initially to be a guest on a panel that I was creating as the words were coming out of my mouth. Mm-hmm. The panel hadn't exactly existed. Now, by the end of that day, I had 4 panelists. By the end of that week, I had 9 panelists. Ultimately, totaling 13 panelists and 4 panels, and that's all been produced at this point. And I called her the following week just because I was really noticing her marketing strategy. And I was like, wow, she's, there's something more. And so I called her and said, this is what I want to name this series, this panel series. And it was around the breakdown to wake up theme. And I think I was asking for permission because I wasn't quite sure myself. And she came back to me and she was like, not only is this absolutely it is, because I was sharing with her the descriptor of what I wanted to create for the panel. She asked me, she called me forward and she said, Jocelyn, this is your book. And I had a very adverse reaction. I'll put it that way. And it was like, oh crap, it's here now. The words have been spoken. And yes, I can shrink back down and say no, or I can step into this and say, she's absolutely right. I've been wanting to write a book. I've known that there's going to be more for me to share through my writing. And it happened. When I say this book happened so fast, from that first conversation to publication, 3 months.
That's
Three
amazing.
months.
That's
And
amazing. That really, it
and
goes to show. Yeah.
what I really fasten that to believe is that I've hit on a market where people are knowing that they are ready to share their own journeys of struggle, of heartache, of challenge, and what they've done to walk through that fire and how they've overcome, and they're still continuing to work on themselves and are thriving even in the ups and downs that we are served day in and day out of this lifetime. And it's really my firm belief that when we show up to share our journeys and share our stories, not only is it healing ourselves, it gives permission for others to do exactly the same, to step in the dark pieces, the dark parts of their lives, step into their shadow selves, acknowledge all of what's going on inside of them, and acknowledge the strength that they have within, and getting to know more about who you are inside. It is someone else's survival guide. When they're not quite ready to tell their story yet, me telling my story, all of my authors coming on board with me, being in that valiant, brave manner, they were willing to go there to give permission for someone else to do so and give someone else the ability to see it as a survival guide for them. And so that is something that it's been a charge for me since really probably my entire life, but it's become much more focused and clear in the last few years. And it's really the impetus piece is it definitely has been my divorce, of ending a marriage and discovering that I never really truly loved and honored myself and taught people how to love me or not love me based on how I was taking care of me.
Right. Let me just pause you before you go into
Yeah.
that. But there's a lot there that I
Yeah.
just want to like
I know.
breathe
Let me
into.
unpack. I'll let you unpack. Go ahead.
Just unpack this for a second because I really do want to hear the story about divorce because I know that's a really common theme.
Right.
Um, but the first word you mentioned a few minutes back was directionless.
Mm.
And I never really heard that word in that context, but I know that I have felt that. And I know our listeners have or do feel that, right? And it's the if not this, then what conversation that I have with myself or maybe my close-in people because I'm feeling valueless. I'm feeling like, what the heck am I going to do with my life? What's the purpose? What's the point of going on? That apathy that shows up. I've been there way too many times. So I hear you in that, but it was just a great word to just anchor in this conversation. I think that's just potent to mention, right? And you just sort of glossed through it, but I just wanted to come back and circle back to that. And the other thing you mentioned was she called you forward, right? Instead of calling you out. And I love that. It's a very sort of simple switch of words with the potency. Instead of calling you out with the connotation of like, I'm calling you out on your stuff, it's like, no, I'm calling you forward. I see your greatness and I'm going to pull you into that, willingly pull you into this. So
Yeah.
what beautiful. And that just sort of ties into like flow. Like when I work with clients or when I share my story, really the epitome is if something is meant to happen, it's going to happen. Our
Yes, I
ego
agree.
can slow things down a little bit, but like that, I mean, I have so many of those stories myself where it's just like things are moving so fast, it feels like a blur and I'm not really in control. So I just sort of surrender to God or, higher source, whatever you want to call it. But clearly this was meant to come out. And yeah, we are in, I mean, 2020 was, I think, the nest egg for it, or not the nest egg, but the egg, the embryo of this transformation that we're all heading into. And whether or not we're feeling directionless or we got our call and we don't know how to get there, or we're already on the journey, the never-ending journey of inner work or personal growth, the shadow work of inner child work, whatever. We're constantly being called forward to do these things. And as I said on a video that I did earlier is timelines. In the realm of timelines, our ego is attached to a timeline. And if
Yes, it
we want
is.
something to last 10 years and it lasts 5, it's a failure. If we want it to last 5 years and last 20 years, it's a failure. Whatever. And unless our ego is in alignment with the spiritual and divine timing of things happening, it's a failure or it went wrong.
Well, let's take that too and maybe put our egos aside.
Right. And that's what I'm getting at, is to just
Yeah.
surrender to the divine timing and the divine flow and trust that things are flowing the way they need to. Like your book came out in 3 months.
And I was going to say, you illuminate that, no pun intended, so beautifully,
Yeah.
because that's exactly what occurred in this time frame that showed up. I, somewhere in my being, I have known for a long time that I was going to be writing. I've known this. And yes, I've mapped out, at this point, I've mapped out 5 books in total,
Wow.
right? And now that the egg is cracked. Having said that, I was not seeking authorship in that conversation. I was not seeking authorship in that time frame of my life. I really showed up to have a conversation about my existing podcast. And that was what transpired was, there is more in here for you to tap. And are you going to step up to this and into the next phase of my being? Or am I going to take a step back and say, I want to stay in my comfort zone,
Mhm.
which is no longer actually comfortable? The
Mm.
comfort zone is such a magnificent and awful term, right? Because we start, in our comfort. So when we go through a really challenging situation in life, and we've all had them, right? Just another experience is job loss is a big one, right? When we're in that place, we lose our job unexpectedly, and now we kind of look around and say, well, gosh, now what's the next step for me? And hopefully, really hopefully, people take that time to do some self-reflection. I know I have, and given myself permission to just be, rather than like freaking out about what the next step is. But really, you kind of attune to this, is like you surrender to the space that you're in and say, I'm just going to feel into this.
Right.
What is feeling like where the next piece of the direction is? And you may sit for a week, a day, a month, 6 months, and you sit in this kind of cocoon phase where you're observing and not necessarily taking a lot of action, but just your action is observation.
Right.
And so you sit in this cocoon phase until you're ready to start to break through that cocoon, because you're meant to.
Right.
You're meant to. You're not meant to stay stagnant. So your cocoon is your comfort zone. Yet when you stay there, you don't allow yourself the ability to grow. And so if you stay in that cocoon too long, it actually will start to become painful, because your wings have already grown and they're not meant to be in that cocoon any longer. So it's time for you to break free from that
Right.
and and then step forward into that, or in this case, float into that next phase of being.
Yeah.
And we all have those opportunities given to us again and again and again and again, and they'll continue to show up until we're ready, until we're actually ready to take that lesson and step into it.
Right.
Right.
Well, what I often say is a lot of people think surrender is death, it's forfeiting, it's giving up. But I tell people surrender is not a passive experience.
Mm-mm.
There's an active component that's necessary in the surrender. Like
Mm-hmm.
you said, the whole month of December last year, I didn't do anything, and I felt like I was a failure and I wasn't doing anything, but I trusted. And then and then the beginning of January was very interesting. A lot of endings came from me. I grieved that. And all of a sudden, mid-January, all of a sudden, I am like a creation beast. I am like, there's so much coming out, a new podcast here coming out, new content. It's just flowing out of me like a fire hydrant, and it's crazy. And so for me, I think a lot of times people judge that pause
Right.
as death, as failure, as what am I doing with my life? And then,
I love that you witnessed your judgment.
pulled into that, right? And it's happened a few times because for me, what I know about me is I'm a double Aries sun moon. So I'm like, let's go, let's start this thing, let's get it started, let's go, come on, why are we sitting around doing nothing? And so for me, part of that's healing, healing that to just pull it back and say, no, it's okay. I'm not going to die from just taking a breather here,
And it is, and I also am an Aries. I didn't know I didn't know I was speaking to a fellow Aries. And I totally, that is part of our sun sign. I don't know what my moon sign is, and that's another conversation.
Another conversation.
And it aligns with my Enneagram as well as of a doer. We're action takers.
They line up. But the point I wanted to get to in that last piece is there's this conversation around perceived failure.
Okay.
Right? Where I see something happen, it's going back to the Chinese teaching, the Zen teaching of the will see, right? Stuff happens. What does it mean? I don't know. Let's sit around and find out. It's like Landmark. We were making machines, right?
I was just going to say
happens,
that.
It means nothing. We create a story and a convention around that publicly, personally, or societally, and then we live off that idea, right? And I know there's naysayers to this idea, but it's so true, right? And so we perceive relationships ending, divorces happening, careers ending, death happening as failures. And they're not.
They're opportunities
There's a
for the next phase. There are transformation. There are pieces of transformation. Absolutely.
Right. And if we
and we have to start to learn to actually train ourselves to undo the negative connotation, give ourselves a new storyline, give ourselves a new narrative.
And I just want to share that. On January 6th of this year, I had to put my cat of 8 years down. Mm-hmm. On January 6th, later that day, a friend of mine contacted me to see if I want to be part of a podcast about grief and loss. And I'm like, what weird world am I living in? The 7th, I recorded that podcast. On the 8th, I was contacted by an organization that I had been working with for the previous 6 months. And the conversation was, look, I am no longer feeling a resonance with our working together, and this needs to come to an end. I said, well, I agree with that. The relationship, the business, professional, and personal relationship terminated immediately on that Friday. As soon as that phone call ended, I literally started hooting and hollering with joy because, I'm grieving the loss of my dear cat. And this happened, but what I was so present to in that moment was freedom. Freedom on a level that I didn't think was possible or hadn't had in years. And yes, I'm still actively grieving, but at the same time, I saw the light through the clouds of freedom. And I'm like, I don't know where this is going. Hand to God, I trust whatever's happening and I have to surrender. And so I've actively been in this, right? And so for people, when you're going through it, it's a lot of times it's hard to see the gift as the fire still burning the carcass of whatever your life was. But give it time, allow the grief to be there and just be present and open up yourself to the possibility of what's next. Not while that death is happening. Let the grieving happen and let it breathe and let it air out. And then you can approach it with fresh eyes and perspective to see what's possible, right? And just be open to the possibility of it, it may sound like I'm glorifying this, but I tell you what, grief and loss is not easy. Right? Even though I'm aware of the process, it doesn't make it any easier. It just sort of gives me the tools to, okay, this is how it's going to unfold and this is what it's going to look like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to stay in that moment of around the grief, you grieving and still seeing the opportunity, because there is an ability within each one of us to have both present. It takes work. It takes work on understanding and knowing and loving who you are and honoring both pieces of both sides of that equation, because it really is both sides of that equation of saying, okay, I've had this ending, and we can either celebrate, and I love that you celebrated one of your endings, or we don't celebrate it.
Through me, I wasn't even a conscious choice. It just
which meant your soul was ready.
Oh yeah. 100%.
Right. And we have those moments in our lives where we celebrate them, and there are moments in our lives that we don't. Right. Okay, so this is honestly what happened when the book showed up. After the book was published, I received my copies, and I had this expectation that, oh my gosh, I remember like the day that the book was published, I had an expectation of what the day was going to feel like,
Mm,
and nothing. I was actually mourning that day. I was not excited that my book was published. I was like crestfallen. It was
mm,
like this chapter of my life is now over. It's out, right?
yeah.
Stepping into the next chapter. And it wasn't until my book arrived, about a week or two later, and held it in my hands. And I sat in the corner of my living room and I wept for like half an hour. And it took a lot for me to take a picture, a selfie, and say, hey, it's here. It took me about 3 or 4 days to announce that publicly because, I had this feeling that I was supposed to be elated and overjoyed and sharing it. And I wasn't in that space. I was in a space of, oh my gosh, now what?
Right.
And yes, I don't want to dismiss like all of the hard work and the way that everyone else showed up for this, because really I put the call into the world once. That was it. Once.
Well,
And in that one, and it was a Facebook post,
right.
right? In that one Facebook post, I ended up having to turn 10 authors away.
That's crazy.
So I don't want to dismiss the bravery and the willingness of every single person who showed up for this. And it was when I talk about the work, the writing wasn't the tough part. It was the catharsis of revisiting old ways of our being
Yeah.
and still uncovering the healing process that was coming through it. And, and every single author, it was really amazing. Every single author that showed up for this, their lives have all transformed since the book
I believe it.
has been
Well,
written
it
and
was,
published.
and I want to start. Go ahead, finish.
And it wasn't, it's not because of the gangbuster sales. It's because they are acknowledging, just like myself, another layer of them being
Yeah.
and recognizing, oh, this pattern may still be here. Oh, I can up level here, or I can shift how I show up in this situation. One of my authors wrote about toxic work environments. He
Mhm.
was a mediator for many, many years, and showed up. He worked in the mediation for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, and realized he really just had a heavy disdain for it and realized how toxic it was. And it actually all resulted in he got in a really bad car accident
Right.
and he almost died.
Yeah.
And coming through that, he had his ahas. Well,
Mhm.
as he's writing that component, he's recognizing that he's currently in another toxic work environment. And the day after the pre-sale went up, he left that toxic work environment
Right. That's
and
great.
created space for something new.
Well, and that's the thing. I want to touch on this, and I want to start wrapping because I know you and I could jam on this for
Yeah.
hours. And I want to mind our time and the listeners' time as well. But like that book was a catharsis for all of you. You put all of your emotions into that, so that doesn't surprise me that you wept for days
Hmm.
in that, because I mean, all of the energy, the hard work, your past, everyone else's past and stories now archived in
Mhm.
this volume for people elsewise to learn and grow from. I mean, that's just, I can't wait to read it myself, honestly, and so it's really fantastic. And in that, the last thing I want to highlight is it's not one and done, kids. It's
No,
not one
no.
transformation in life and then I'm free, scot free. No, it's like they're going to keep coming. And the more they come, the more beautiful they can be.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're open, at least I'll speak for myself. I'm more open with each passing, with each transition, where now, like I said earlier, like it was almost a celebration into the unknown.
Hmm.
Unknown. So with that, Jocelyn, what are ways, any sort of wrapping thoughts and or how can people get a hold of you? And then we'll put all that contact information in the description of the podcast. But go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So wrapping thoughts, I think what I come back to is we sort of touched on it and we didn't really dive into it deeply. When with every one of these authors, myself included, a common thread with all of this was we recognized in each one of ourselves as how we were disempowering
Mm,
ourselves in our thoughts and our words and our actions and not actually showing up in our strength and saying, okay, I'm willing and accepting of this, but I'm not willing and not accepting of that. And really what that comes down to, it boils down to really truly loving and honoring who you are in every situation. In every situation, and not to concern yourself with, I'm upset or I'm concerned about this person, how they're going to react or respond, because that's a fear-based, that's another level of disempowerment. Showing up and taking ownership in every situation of your life, in every conversation, every communication, saying yes and saying no, because they're both very strong, and continuing to love on yourself. That's the piece that is most important. The way that you show up for you is you're teaching other people how to love you. And that was a common thread with each and every one of these authors. Not something I asked for. That was just a common theme. So that's a piece that that'd be a takeaway.
I'll say that is a common thread. I just want to say on that, I would say the yes and the and is we are always in choice in every moment to author our lives how we want it to go. And if we're not happy or satisfied, we're the only one that has the pen in our hand to change that narrative. So just the yes and to what you're saying, because I completely agree, right?
Yeah.
Yes is the nose. Yeah, absolutely.
And as far as finding how to work with me and finding about me. So I am a breakdown to wake up coach. I work with men and women to break through their BS, all the stories that they've told themselves about all the stories that others have told themselves about who they are and what they're meant to be and how they're meant to show up. So I work with men and women to break through their BS, to find their authentic voice and use that in an empowered way through written word and through speaking. So if that resonates with you and what I've shared today, I'd love to hear from you guys. You guys can find me at jocelynbellows.com. And the book is available on Amazon. You can search me at Jocelyn Bellows. I'm sorry, I don't have the link readily available, but we'll include that in the show notes.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, that's powerful. And I think a lot of people are sort of needing that wake up. And I love that you said break through the BS, right? Because there's a lot of that happening. Well, Jocelyn, it's been such a pleasure. I knew this was going to be an amazing conversation, and I imagine all of our listeners enjoyed it as well. So thank you for being on the show. I won't be surprised if I have you back again to continue this conversation. I'd
love to. Yeah.
So, gratitude. Thank you for the show. And thank you for the listeners who have been paying attention. If you, like Jocelyn said, if you enjoyed this conversation, make a comment, send us a message, and share this message. It's really needing to get out right now. This message is so important. Transformation is here. And also, if you enjoyed this, subscribe and like to the podcast and share it with people. So thank you all for listening. Get out there, make a beautiful and blessed day, and know that you got this. And if you need support, just reach out. All right. Be well, everyone.